If your database offers an auto-identity column, I bet you have used it already. But if you expose that numeric ID in a public API, we need to talk. Doing that brings some risks, so let's talk about them. First, leak implementation details. Auto-generated IDs are in fact an implementation detail. Why? What if you need to move to another type of database that doesn't offer the same feature? Or what if you need to generate that ID before getting into that database? But we'll talk about that scenario later. Let's first talk about leak information. On a scenario like this, when I know that my order is the number 155, I can use that data to infer a lot of things. And part of the risk of leaking that data is security. There's one type of security attack that is the enumeration attack that consists in going through a range of numbers. So if we know that we are in the 155, we can try the 154, 153, and so on until the 0, and try to get access to another order that we shouldn't have access to. Obviously, nowadays everyone should have row-level security, but let me tell you one thing. Bugs happen, mistakes happen, so this is the type of mitigation that at least can help somehow. But this is not the most important part of it. When you leak the information of the 155, now I know that you should have 154 more orders in your database. And this, my friend, is a business risk. If you're not seeing where I'm going, think about how happy would you be if you could know the number of orders of your competitors. And now I can. If I can see that if I buy something today, I have the order 155, and if I do this, for example, once a year, I can order something from you and know how many orders you had in the previous year. And this type of information is extremely valuable. Imagine this happening in a public traded company. It might influence the stock prices. However, in some cases, having that ID, the 155 there, might be extremely useful. As an example, as a developer, for sure you have noticed that when you are using GitHub, accessing to the issues or PRs is a sequential number inside of that repo, and that is extremely useful for anyone navigating on that platform. Knowing that the issue is the number 123, it's easier than a strange code and it's more accessible. And since that information is open, there's nothing bad that can come from it. Another good reason to avoid this type of incremental IDs in your APIs is the fact that it imposes a limitation for the future. So imagine the following scenario. You have an API, that API receives a request, it writes to a database, it gets the ID from the database and returns to the user. So now the user knows that that request created the order, the customer, whatever, with the number 123. This will work extremely fine until the day that you need to delegate this work to a queue because you want to reply quickly to your customer, and that process of writing to the database, validating the order, whatever, is taking too long. So you want to do the kind of thing that you have in Amazon where you have an order and that order will eventually be confirmed through email later. So for sure, it was not happening right away. So the typical way to address this thing is to bring a queue. You will write to that queue will eventually be processed, and when it's processed, it will write into the database. But moving to this flow imposes a new problem. How do you keep with that previous contract of replying directly to your customer with the ID of the created order? That's an hard problem to solve because you are waiting for the ID coming from the database. And since we are talking about performance improvements, let's also talk about distributed systems. Imagine that you have exactly the same API. The API receives a request, writes to the database, gets the ID from that database and returns back. Now you need to distribute the processing of your applications. Let's pretend that you have one API running in Europe and another one running in China. But that will be worthless if they both need to access exactly to the same server, to the same database server. So you will have an instance of the database on each region. But that means that now you will have collisions in terms of IDs, because the auto-generated ID will be working on each database. So without a single authority responsible to generate those IDs, you can't have a sync counter across multiple servers, multiple regions. So this will also impose a problem. So as you can see, by having an ID in your API doesn't mean that you will always have a problem, but it might be. It's a design decision that you need to take, and it will always depend on your use case. But if one of those problems is your reality, or you want to avoid getting into there, what can you do? If you can adopt a different type of ID, the answer is Universal Unique Identifiers, also known as Global Unique Identifiers, GUIDs in the .NET world. They are low effort and most databases already have that type in place. What makes of them the type of simple decision that we would like to eliminate all those problems that we discussed before. But even with them, you can go an extra mile. The first thing that I will do is to remove the dashes. Copy and pasting a GUID is always a pain. You double click on a part of that GUID and it doesn't select the complete GUID, so I will remove that. And the other thing that I would do is to add a business meaningful prefix to that identifier. I have seen this technique being extremely useful for my consumers. Why? When all of your IDs are unique identifiers like this one, all of them look like the same because they are hard to read. So it is common that when someone is calling your API to copy the wrong ID into the wrong place. As an example, pasting the customer ID into the product ID property. And when you bring this prefix, it means that you can do the validation, it will be more intuitive to your consumer, so there's a lot of benefits on a simple decision like that. But what if you need to keep using that incremental ID in your database, but you still want to give a more friendly ID to the consumers of your API? Something that looks like the ID of the video that you are watching right now on your address bar. If you want to provide an experience like that, you have libraries like Squids, but keep in mind that it's simply a visual experience. It's just a cosmetic change. Squids will convert a number into a pleasant-to-use ID, however, it's not cryptographic. That means that it's possible to reverse that code into the original number. However, that's something that I really enjoy on Squids, that is, you can encode multiple values into a single ID. As an example, in a structure like a master detail page, you can combine multiple IDs into a single one to represent a given record. And then you can reverse that ID into the original numbers that represent the master and the detail. That might be extremely useful. As you can see, this is the type of simple and small decision that might be extremely impactful for the future of your API. And that's why you need to watch this video right here, where I show you 4 other design tips that you don't want to miss for your next REST API.